Hi, this is Miss Hale, and we're doing the nervous system notes. This is actually just part one. We're going to be talking about nerves and nerves, other cells related to nerves. And so a nerve cell is also known as a neuron, and so that transmits information. It has multiple parts. The main parts are the cell body, which has the nucleus and some extensions. Those extensions are the dendrites, which receive information. They're much shorter and there's many of them. Whereas an axon is a long single fiber that conducts the impulses away. So the important thing to remember about dendrites is that they take in information, whereas axons give off information. So the nervous system is separated into two parts. The central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord only, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is the nerves of the body. And so that's 31 spinal nerves as well as 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which go directly, are related directly to the brain. So here's your basic division. So you have your brain and your spinal cord, which make up the CNS, and then the nerves and the ganglia, which make up the peripheral. So the basic functions are to gather information via sensory input, like touch, taste, smell, to integrate that information or to bring it together, and then to respond either by motor output, movement, or by maintaining homeostasis or a balance in the body. There are two groups of motor functions that could happen. One is somatic, which is your voluntary systems or your skeletal muscle groups. And then your autonomic nervous system is your smooth muscles and your involuntary glands, like your heart, your stomach, your liver, and things like that. So autonomic is not voluntary. The neuroglial cells, ignore the page numbers, this is from a separate book. The neuroglial cells support cells from the neurons, so they are helper cells, and there's different types of them. The first type is microglial cells, which is there's a picture of that here, or the little yellow flowers that were on your coloring page. And they are scattered throughout of the nervous system, and what they do is they digest debris or bacteria. So they are kind of part of the immune system as well. The second type is an oligodendrocyte, which looks like this. That was the purple on your coloring page. And those provide insulation for the axons. This is in the central nervous system only. In the peripheral nervous system, the Schwann cells would create the insulation. Then you have your astrocytes, which are star-shaped, and they connect the blood vessels to the neurons. So here's the astrocyte here, here's the capillary, and here's the nerve cell. Then you have your ependymal cells, which form a membrane that covers brain-like parts. So those are here. And so they can be found in the brain cavity as well as the spinal cord cavity, and they help to cushion the brain and spinal cord as well as to move the fluid. And then Schwann cells form the myelin sheath around neurons that are part of the peripheral nervous system. And we will, again, go over this with your coloring page even more. So again, here are different supporting cells that you have in your nervous system. And these four are of the central nervous system. And again, Schwann is the peripheral. Here's a picture of a neuron. And they have different sections. We talked about axon and dendrites already. And then you also have neurofibrils, which are in here. And those are fibers that are found within the axon. So you also have your rough ER or your chromatophilic substance, which helps to transport materials within the nerve. You have your myelin, which is a type of insulation. It helps to speed up signals through the axon. And then you have nodes of Ranvier, which are between the myelin sheaths. And so you can label your neuron on your paper. In the brain and spinal column, you have white matter and gray matter. So white matter is actually your myelinated axons, and then gray matter would be unmyelinated. And so you can see that the gray matter exists mostly on the outside part of the brain. We'll be working on labeling this later on. So some interesting things about the neuron. They live and function for a very long time for cells. They don't divide. So the only exception is when they're a stem cell. And they have a high metabolic rate, which means that they require a lot of oxygen and glucose, which is why you have so many blood vessels that are close to nerves, and why your brain is so heavily, heavily vasculated. So it has so many blood vessels. And the interesting thing is, if you surprise a baby, you may see that their whole body reacts because their nerve fibers are unmyelinated, and so they sometimes involve their whole body in their responses. There are different classifications of neurons. They can be sensory neurons, motor neurons, or in between, so they can be interneurons. And then there's also structural. So bipolar means that there's two extensions from the cell body. So 1, 2. Unipolar is the cell body, there's one extension. So this would be found in sensory neurons. Multipolar, where the dendrites come directly off of the cell body. And that is found in a motor neuron. You don't have to worry about this one. So here's the path of a nerve impulse. So you're going to have your sensory receptor, and the impulse is going to travel down the sensory neuron to the brain, or to the integration point. And then it's going to come back and go through the motor neuron, and then the motor neuron, you'll have your effector organ. And so in this case, if you hear the phone ringing, you pick up the phone. So it's a very, very quick process. So now we're going to talk about the synaptic cleft. Synapses exist where axons meet dendrites. And so you can see here's one neuron here. It is attached, or it is close to an axon of the previous neuron. It creates a synapse, and then its axon creates a synapse with the next neuron. So it's important to know that at rest, a neuron's membrane has a negative charge, so it is polarized. And there's a sodium-potassium pump in the cell membrane that pumps sodium out of the cell and potassium in. However, potassium leaks out of the cell more, and so as a result, the inside of the membrane builds up a net negative charge to the outside. So we're still only talking about positive ions, but because there's more outside than inside, you have a slightly negative charge inside. So when we have a nerve impulse, it's proportionate to the diameter of the axon. So if it's a greater diameter of the axon, then it's a faster speed. And if you have a myelinated axon, they conduct much faster than unmyelinated. So you want your axons to be myelinated. A synapse is a junction between two neurons. It doesn't touch, so there is a space. And the space is actually called the synapse. The nerve pathway is when the nerve impulse travels from neuron to neuron. And so what's going to happen is the impulse will come in through the dendrite, be transmitted to the cell body, and then run along the axon until it reaches the synapse or gap. And then to complete the signal, a neurotransmitter will be released at the gap to signal the next neuron to do its job. We're not going to do that right now. Okay, structures of the synapse. You have your presynaptic axon as with a neurofilament running through it, and it has an impulse, so the impulse is running through. At the end you have a mitochondrion, and that's for energy production. And then you have some synaptic vesicles. Those will travel this way and combine with the cell membrane to release neurotransmitters. And then the space is called the synaptic cleft. And then you have a postsynaptic dendrite, and so the dendrite will take up the neurotransmitter, or will be signaled by the neurotransmitter to send an impulse through. And so there's different types of neurotransmitters. They can be in one of two groups. They could be excitatory, which means they're increasing the membrane permeability and increasing the chance for the threshold or the neuron to be activated. And inhibitory decrease membrane permeability and decrease the chance that the neuron will be activated. And so within the cell body, you're going to have synthesis of the neurotransmitter, and it will be transported down the axon with the action potential. No. Sorry, Dr. Kate interrupted me. Okay, so then the action potential will cause the neurotransmitter to leave. The neurotransmitter will attach to the receptor. Then it will leave the receptor. It'll be up. Oop. It will. The axon terminal will take the neurotransmitter back up, and then if the vesicle doesn't have a neurotransmitter, it will go all the way back up to the cell body to take new stuff down. It's a nice little cycle. Okay. So you have some types listed. Acetylcholine obviously simulates muscle contraction. We've talked about that before. Monoamines, like norepinephrine and dopamine, give you a sense of feeling good. If you don't have a lot of them, then it can cause depression. Serotonin causes sleepiness and regulates your mood. And then endorphins reduce pain and actually inhibit your receptors, endorphins are some of the reasons why you can lift a car if your kid is stuck underneath, because you have endorphins. So those are some different types. There are certain drugs that affect your synapses and your neurotransmitters, like Curare, which is used by South American Indians. So it's a poison made from frog skin, and it blocks your acetylcholine receptors, so you can't move your muscles. Strychnine, which is rat poison, actually does not affect your central nervous system. It only affects your peripheral, and so you die, but you are completely conscious. Cocaine and other drugs anesthetize your nerve fibers, and so that means that you can't feel as much. They're really inhibitory, so you don't really feel as much, and judgment decreases, and all of the things that you learn about in health class. LSD makes you hallucinate. And then ecstasy, some dangers of it, you can really overheat. It inhibits serotonin, and so it doesn't inhibit serotonin, it causes a flood of serotonin, and so you can really overheat and your body temperature is not correct. I'm going to skip over this. Antidepressants work with serotonin as well. And so a neuronal pool is a group of neurons that works together, and so that helps us remember things like sequential tasks. And then, the different types of nerves. Sensory nerves go into the brain. Motor nerves carry impulses back out to the muscles of the glands. Mixed nerves contain both. Okay, here we go again. Afferent, integration, efferent. And then the reflex arc is very related to that. We talked about that in class as well. And so you have your sense come in. It's going to be transmitted by the sensory nerve. It's going to come out and go to the motor nerve or nerves, and you'll have different reflexes. And so we are done. Have a great weekend.